Imagine a woman who spent years deciding things for everyone else, suddenly standing in the only room in town where her word means nothing at all. Morning had barely settled over the little municipal courtroom. Coats still smelled of cold air, wet umbrellas leaned against wooden benches scarred by decades of elbows and nervous hands. Shoes tapped softly on the linoleum, paper sleeves crinkled as people shuffled their tickets and summonses, waiting to be called, hoping to be done. Then the door latch clicked, and the noise tapered off by instinct. She stepped inside as if the space belonged to her. Not hurried, not flustered, each step measured, chin slightly raised, eyes sliding over the crowd rather than meeting any face. Her suit was simple and expensive, the kind you'd recognize even if you didn't know the label. The kind of outfit worn by someone who attends ceremonies, not hearings. Mrs. Collins. Wife of the police chief. At her side, almost clinging to the idea of blending in, walked a younger woman, her daughter-in-law. Hands knotted around a small purse, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Whatever confidence the older woman projected, the younger one clearly didn't share it. They took their place at the front. The younger woman sat, Mrs. Collins remained standing, spine straight like she'd done this before and knew exactly how it should go. The clerk read the case number, voice flat with routine, 3 citations for stopping in a handicapped zone outside the city hospital. On paper, a minor offense. In reality, 3 different days, 3 ignored opportunities to change course. Judge Caprio glanced up, his expression mild but alert. "Ma'am, you're here on several parking violations. Do you understand the charges?" She exhaled, a breath that sounded more like annoyance than concern. "Let's not waste time," she said. "My husband already knows about this." There it was, the first shift in the air. A few people in the benches turned their heads. Someone let out a tiny, disbelieving chuckle. A man near the aisle murmured, "Well, that's new." Caprio didn't flinch. The warmth in his eyes cooled just enough to be noticeable. He checked the file again, thumb marking the line that read, 3 consecutive offenses. "And how do you plead?" he asked. She didn't blink. "We decide what's fair in this town." The words hung in the room like smoke. A sharp breath escaped from somewhere in the back. The clerk stopped writing for a moment. The young woman beside her, her son's wife, tightened her grip on her purse and stared at the floor as if she wished it would swallow her whole. Caprio didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at Mrs. Collins a little longer, the way a man looks at a puzzle that suddenly refuses to stay simple. Around them, ordinary people shifted on hard benches, their own small worries briefly forgotten. They had come to argue over meters and signs and late fees. Now they understood, this morning was going to be about something much larger. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Judge Caprio folded his hands and leaned slightly forward, softening his voice just enough to signal he wanted something real, not rehearsed. "Mrs. Collins," he said, "before we continue, I'd like to understand who you are beyond these papers." It threw her off. She clearly expected a brief exchange, a stamp, a swift exit. Not a conversation. "I'm sure you don't need my biography," she replied, crisp and controlled. But the judge didn't look away. In that small pause, the younger woman beside her shifted, twisting a bracelet around her wrist with anxious fingers. Then, barely above a whisper, she spoke. "It wasn't all her," the young woman said. "Some of those days, she drove me." The whole room stilled. The tone wasn't accusatory. It sounded like someone trying to shield another person, even at the cost of exposing her own pain. Judge Caprio turned gently toward her. "Would you like to explain?" She nodded, but her voice trembled. "After the baby, there were complications. I've been going to the outpatient clinic 3 times a week. I couldn't drive. She took me." A few in the benches exchanged glances, not pitying, but softening. Mrs. Collins exhaled slowly, and for a moment something vulnerable flickered across her face. But only for a moment. She straightened again. It was my responsibility to help, she said. And sometimes there were delays. The judge's eyes slid to the case file. One date caught his attention. That particular day, he asked, tapping the page lightly, the police department was all over the news. A major operation. Your husband was leading it. The room tensed. Everyone remembered the footage, flashing lights, press briefings, the chief addressing reporters with firm authority. The older woman's jaw tightened. I remember, she said. So while he was coordinating that, Caprio continued carefully, you parked in a handicapped zone for nearly an hour outside the hospital. According to this timestamp. The young woman lowered her face, guilt written in the small tremor of her shoulders. Mrs. Collins blinked twice, slow, considering. Her confidence, once impenetrable, thinned at the edges. She finally said, that day, was not about medical urgency. I didn't want to wait in line at the lab. It was crowded. I thought, she stopped, realizing how hollow the sentence sounded in the air. The benches rustled with a mix of discomfort and judgment. Several older attendees exchanged looks that carried decades of lived experience, respect for rules, disdain for shortcuts. The judge didn't chastise her. He let the silence do the work. In that heavy quiet, it became clear, this wasn't a woman who set out to harm anyone. But it was a woman who had lived long enough with invisible privileges that she no longer saw the boundaries they crossed. And the younger woman, still staring at her hands, seemed to hold the unspoken truth, the whole family had been living in a shadow cast by the power around them. This was no longer about parking. It was about habits, entitlement, and a life built on unchallenged assumptions. And the judge, watching them both, understood they were only at the beginning of the unraveling. The courtroom's air seemed to tighten as Judge Caprio signaled for the clerk to read the timeline again. His tone wasn't stern, just precise, the way someone speaks when assembling pieces of a puzzle they suspect is missing a corner. The clerk cleared her throat and began. Incident 1, brief stop, hospital entry recorded. Incident 2, short-term drop-off. Incident 3. She paused. Vehicle remained in a handicapped zone for 47 minutes. No recorded entrance to the hospital. A faint ripple of whispers moved through the benches. Mrs. Collins straightened, but the tension around her mouth betrayed her. That must be incorrect, she said. I would never. Before she could finish, the judge turned his attention to the younger woman. Were you with her that day? He asked. The question landed like a stone. The young woman pressed her lips together, eyes fixed on her hands. After several long seconds, she answered. No. That wasn't a clinic day. We argued that morning. Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. A subtle shift spread across the room, not triumph, not condemnation, just the recognition that the truth had begun to surface. Judge Caprio nodded once, grateful for honesty, then returned to the file. There's also camera footage, he said. It shows you exiting your vehicle and walking, not toward the hospital, but across the street. Someone in the back exhaled sharply. The older woman blinked, stunned for a fraction of a second before leaning into controlled indignation. I stepped out briefly, that's all. The judge raised a hand gently. No one is accusing you of being reckless, ma'am. But intention and action aren't always the same. Another detail followed, delivered quietly by the clerk. A report was filed that day by a passerby. They observed a vehicle with a police access tag occupying a disabled space. They called to ask whether officers were allowed to do that. At that, several heads turned toward Mrs. Collins, reading the implication without needing it spoken. Her nephew-in-law coat shifted beside her, discomfort radiating from the way she tucked her shoulders forward. Her voice came through barely audible. They reported you because they thought you had authority to take it. The older woman swallowed hard. For the first time, her composure was not a shield but a strain. Judge Caprio observed her closely. Not judging, listening. Ma'am, he said at last, gently but firmly, earlier you said, we decide what's fair. That's a powerful statement. But fairness begins with what actually happened. A long, uneasy silence followed. Not one person shuffled. Even the HVAC hum seemed to fade. Then the judge added, almost softly. Tell me honestly, why were you there that long, in that spot, on that day? She looked away, not at the ceiling, not at the door, but at the floor, where truth becomes hardest to deny. And in that small hesitation, the courtroom saw it, the first crack in a wall built over years of status and habit. This wasn't defiance anymore. It was fear of what the truth might say about her. And the judge knew, the next step would change the entire direction of the case. The hinges of the courtroom door creaked softly as Judge Caprio asked whether the person who filed the original complaint was present. A few heads turned, most expected no one would come forward. But then an older man rose slowly from the third row, leaning on a polished wooden cane. He walked with deliberate care, each step marked by the muted tap of the cane against the floor. When he reached the front, he didn't glare, didn't posture. He simply nodded to the judge and said, in a steady, unembellished voice. I wasn't looking for a battle. I just needed that space that day. A hush blanketed the room, respectful, instinctive. Veterans carried weight in Providence, and everyone knew it. He continued. I had an appointment I'd waited months for. When I got there, the handicapped spots were taken. One of them by a vehicle with a police access tag. His eyes shifted briefly toward Mrs. Collins. I circled the lot 3 times. Missed my scheduled treatment because of it. The color drained from her face, as if the accusation pierced deeper than she anticipated. The young wife beside her lowered her head, her expression collapsing into something fragile and wounded. You told me you only stopped for groceries, she whispered, voice trembling. You said you didn't stay long. The betrayal in that sentence cut sharper than the veteran's account. Mrs. Collins opened her mouth, but what emerged wasn't clarity, it was a defensive gasp, a scramble for footing in a room that no longer tilted in her favor. I was trying to help you. You were struggling. But the words faltered, unable to mask the gulf between her intentions and their consequences. Judge Caprio watched her carefully, then spoke with a resolve that carried no anger, just truth. Mrs. Collins, this isn't about a citation anymore. This is about the people whose lives were touched by your choices. She inhaled sharply, then exhaled through pressed lips, refusing to meet the veteran's steady gaze. Her fingers tightened around her purse strap, knuckles paling as the courtroom's silence pressed down around her. The veteran shifted his weight, the cane tapping lightly again. Not accusatory, just present. His presence alone was enough to strip away any remaining illusion of harmlessness. For the first time, Mrs. Collins looked genuinely uncertain. The confidence she wore like armor cracked at the edges. She blinked rapidly, as though trying to push back tears she didn't want acknowledged. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. Your status does not shield you here, he said softly. Not today. In that moment, the room understood, the case had crossed a threshold. There would be no returning to the story she walked in with. When the room settled again, Judge Caprio asked the clerk to bring forward the supplemental report. A stack of documents was placed before him, thin pages, but heavy with implication. As he scanned the first few lines, his brow lifted ever so slightly, the only sign that something deeper had surfaced. He looked up. Officer, walk us through these entries, please. The officer cleared his throat and began reading. On the date of the charity event at the precinct, Mrs. Collins' vehicle was recorded in the handicapped zone for the duration of the gathering. A ripple moved across the courtroom. That event had been widely covered in local news, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. Mrs. Collins shut her eyes for a moment, as if bracing for an impact she'd hoped would never come. This contradicts your earlier statement, Caprio said gently, not harshly, just factually. You indicated these stops were tied to hospital visits. Her lips parted, but no explanation emerged. And the following entry? The judge asked. The officer continued. 2 citations were forwarded to the police administrative office rather than processed normally. It appears they were reviewed under the chief's clearance protocol. A soft, astonished murmur spread through the rows. No one shouted. They didn't need to. The implications alone filled the air. Judge Caprio turned toward her. Did your husband know about these incidents? Her voice faltered. He knew some of them. That single admission cut sharper than a confession. It confirmed what the room suspected: influence had hovered around this family like a shield for years. But the most important moment was still ahead. The young wife, who had been silent since her earlier outburst, suddenly swallowed hard and faced the judge. Your Honor. I asked her many times not to use that pass. I told her it made people uncomfortable. She told me. She paused, her eyes welling. She said, don't worry. Nobody touches our family. A collective breath was drawn in the gallery. It wasn't anger this time, it was clarity. A complete picture finally taking shape. Mrs. Collins lowered her gaze, shoulders sinking. Her confidence had evaporated, replaced by something rawer, less rehearsed. For the first time, she seemed aware of the damage her certainty had caused. Judge Caprio placed the papers down, folding his hands neatly atop them. His voice, when he spoke, held a quiet finality. The law is not an inheritance, he said. And it is never a personal privilege. It belongs to the public. Every one of them. He let the words hang. The silence that followed wasn't hostile, just heavy with the truth. For a long moment, no one moved. The courtroom felt suspended, as if the building itself waited to hear what came next. Mrs. Collins sat very still, hands clasped tightly together, her earlier confidence nowhere in sight. When she finally lifted her head, her voice sounded smaller, almost unfamiliar. Judge, may I speak? Caprio nodded once. I thought I was helping my family, she said, breath catching. I thought stepping in made things easier for everyone. But I see now. I wasn't helping anyone. I was just taking space that wasn't mine to take. Her words didn't come with theatrics, no tears, no trembling. Just an honest reckoning. And the quiet that followed felt different. The gallery wasn't judging anymore. They were listening. Judge Caprio leaned slightly forward, elbows resting on the bench, the posture of a man who understood both the weight of rules and the fragility of people. Mrs. Collins, he began, you've spent years surrounded by authority. I don't doubt you believed you were doing what was expected. But responsibility doesn't begin with a badge, a title, or a marriage. It begins with looking beyond your own circle. She nodded, barely. He continued, steady and composed. You will pay the accumulated fines. But I'm not imposing the highest penalties available to me. Instead, I want you to understand the people affected by your choices. He paused, letting his next words land with precision. You will complete 20 hours of volunteer service at the Veterans Clinic. Work with the staff. Listen to the patients. Help them. Learn from them. A faint gasp escaped from someone in the back row, but it wasn't outrage. It was surprise at how perfectly the consequence fit the harm. Mrs. Collins inhaled slowly, as if the decision pierced through armor she didn't realize she wore. I accept, she said quietly. But the judge wasn't finished. He turned to the young wife. And you, keep saying what you said today. Families stay strong not because of silence, but because of honesty. A shimmer of relief crossed the young woman's face, relief mixed with something like pride. Then Caprio addressed the room, his tone shifting into something deep and resonant, the kind of cadence that stays with a listener long after the bench is empty. Fairness isn't what we claim in public, he said. It's what we practice when no one is watching. No applause followed. No cheers. Just a profound, shared stillness, as if everyone understood they'd witnessed a rare moment where the law felt not cold or procedural, but profoundly human. As Mrs. Collins stood to leave, she passed the veteran. She hesitated, then spoke softly. "If you'll allow me, I can drive you to your appointment next week." The veteran regarded her for a moment, then gave a slow, respectful nod. She walked out of the courtroom different from the woman who had entered, lighter, humbled, not absolved but awakened. And for the people watching, it was enough to believe that even those who grew up behind the strongest shields could still choose a better path when someone finally held up a mirror.